This is the Unstarving Musicians Podcast. The podcast features conversation for musicians of all types and genres, a curation of expertise intended to help all musicians be better at marketing, business, the creative process, and all the other things that empower us to do more of what we love, make music. Hola musicians, friends, little ducklings. This is Robonzo, aka Roberto. This episode of the Unstarving Musicians Podcast features a conversation with host of indie radio station The Appetizer Radio Show, D. Grant Smith. D. Grant is what he likes to call an audience growth farmer. His longtime mission is not only to curate quality music in album format, but also to help musicians be better at growing their careers. Sounds a little familiar. He's also the author of a book that I highly recommend you check out, the DIY Musicians Radio Handbook, How to Growth Hack Your Fan Base and Build Stronger Networks Using Indie Radio Airplay. Our conversation touches on his work, Chris Cornell, marketing Jedi Seth Godin, and why showing you care about others will get you far. Please enjoy my conversation with D. Grant Smith. D. Grant Smith, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks a lot, Roberto. It's good to be here.
Absolutely. I've been looking forward to this. You and I think we're rolling on about 5 or 6 months since we first met. Does that sound accurate?
I am a terrible judge of time. So, yeah, whatever your memory says, we'll just stick with that.
Well, we kind of met online. You struck me as a really just nice person, and I started looking at your work. And one of the first things I saw was a book that we're going to talk about that I think is relevant to up-and-coming musicians, particularly indie artists. That might be the right kind of niche to mention there. But you are into a lot of things. You are a slightly different host than I've had thus far. Most of the folks that I've had so far are players. I've had a producer on here, and I know you've been at least one of those, if not both of them. But these days, you focus on relationship building and audience growth. But you've done some significant work in the area of helping artists get their music on indie radio. Before we came on, I mentioned to you that I was just kind of going through some notes and looking at reviewing your online presence, and the first thing that jumped out at me was your personal brand. So that makes you unique to some of the folks that I've had on. You know, when I go to your website, I see D. Grant Smith, audience growth farmer for musicians and creative entrepreneurs. Can you talk a little bit about the brand that you've been building, the work that you're doing with regards to audience growth? And let's just go ahead and dive into the whole relationship thing too, because I know that's really important to you. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so one of the things that kind of got me into working directly with musicians is I created a radio show in 2003 called the Appetizer Radio Show. And there's a lot of people that see my brand there and they think that I've got this food show, and it's not. And so it's kind of a litmus test. And I'll just kind of give a little bit of a mention here. When you're talking to anybody that does media at all, be sincere about how much you know about who they are and what they do. And if you're curious, ask questions, but pretending that you know a lot about their stuff when you don't is not a good way to kick things off. I do get people that are like, oh, I love your show, man, because I love the way you talk about, recipes and stuff. And I'm like, what show are you listening to? That's not me. So I created this show, and I play on a metaphor that we eat different types of food. We should listen to different types of music. And it's going to be 14 years this year, holy cow. But over the history of the show, I went from trying to play all the different types of music that I enjoyed into playing different artists that I didn't think were getting the recognition or the opportunities that they deserved. And so we are a launch pad for a lot of artists, and we have been for a long time. But our focus is on albums and not singles. There's too many platforms for singles, and there's not enough, I don't think, for album superfans. And so that's what the Appetizer Radio Show is about. But from obviously giving artists a start and building connections and relationships, I would reach out to folks that I really enjoyed their music, enjoyed their story, and ask them if I could, do an interview or whatever for the, sorry if you're hearing a train in the background. I'm like 4 blocks away from the train.
That's okay.
But from those experiences, I just started seeing ways that I could help people in a different capacity than just playing their music. And that led to doing some more like critical reviews and kind of contracting myself out to give people a review from a radio perspective and really break down their work and tell them, what works from the different capacities that I'm listening to when I make a decision on what's going to get radio play and what's not. And I've got a free ebook you can get on my website, which is called Get Radio Ready. And the website is dgrantsmith.com. But before you submit to radio, or even before you submit to blogs or podcasts or anything like that, your music needs to have 3 key components. And if you don't really have those components, you're not going to necessarily have what you need to be able to appeal to somebody that doesn't know who you are. And I'll just tell you what those things are, but you can get the explanation for them and how you can acquire them by grabbing the book. But the 3 things are: you need to have a good sound, production quality, all that good stuff. You need to have a kind of a compelling piece of songwriting that connects and tells a good story. But most importantly, you need to do something that connects with the audience. You need to give them an experience that connects with their heart and with their mind and their emotions. Because without that emotional connection, there's not really anything memorable enough to stick with. And for me, that's the deal maker or breaker. And an emotional experience doesn't mean that I break down in tears and I'm crying my eyes out. It can be just that I'm tapping my toe and, I'm kind of getting into the song or whatever. It doesn't have to, the Ramones didn't have a whole lot of emotionally connected stuff if we think about it the way we think about Adele or something like that. But, you got into the beat and you got into the rhythm, and that's what it was. But those 3 things are important. And so I started teaching about the components of getting radio airplay, and then just really that led into, I became a syndicated radio host, which means my show is heard all over the country. I did that by relationship building. I didn't do that by hiring an expensive PR company or a marketing company. I thought about that. I made a lot of the same mistakes that artists make now when they reach out to media. I sent a lot of blanket emails at first, and it didn't work. And when I turned the strategy around and said, what if I connected with individuals and I tried to connect with them because I valued them, then that's when everything changed for me. And so that's what I teach people how to do through coaching and relationship building.
Very cool. Can you touch on any other mistakes that you might have made that would be, helpful? I'm sure that somebody right now is making them or or recently made them and doesn't even realize it.
Yeah, so this ties into the book I wrote last year, or published last year, the DIY Musician's Radio Handbook, which is tied to an online course I have, which is the Indie Radio Promotion Course. And you can find out both of those if you want. I'm not trying to just plug myself, but just to say, if you want some information on that, it's at my website.
Sure.
But some of the most common mistakes, and here's the thing, man, DIY musicians / unsigned artists, they make the same mistakes that promotions and PR companies do, which is if you send a blanket generic email, doesn't matter whether it's got pictures in it, whether or not you've told your life story and your life story is so compelling, it's like written by Cormac McCarthy, or you just send like a mention of, I'm a band, or, my name's Dan and I'm in a band and you should listen to my band because I'm Dan and I'm awesome. And that's all you say. They're the same thing, essentially, because you haven't given anybody a reason to care. The mistakes that anybody makes when you're reaching out to a stranger is not thinking about what it is you're actually doing. You're super passionate about your work because it's your work, and you know about it, and you are passionate about it because it's yours, and it's your baby, and you own it. But when you're contacting somebody that you don't know, they don't know your face, they don't know your name, they've never heard of you before, you're a stranger. And how many strangers are you listening to and caring about what they say, especially when they reach out to you and all they want from you is a handout or for you to scratch their back? But there's been absolutely zero connection made. It's not very often that you even get a response back from these people. So thinking about it from somebody else's perspective and deciding on the front end what your intention is. Because one of the mistakes that are made in these blanket emails is just trying to get your song spun once or just trying to get one mention. Man, in the long run, that doesn't help you. It might feel cool to get your song on the radio and think that you've, and it is a successful thing. I'm not trying to be negative about that. But getting one song spun on the radio is not the same as the big win that you could get if you make a new friend. And so when you think about it from the intention of how can I make a friend from this person who has influence or this person that has an audience that I want to get in front of, then you start thinking about it from their perspective. Well, I need to know a little bit about them so I can know how to reach out to them. Yes, exactly. That's exactly what you need to do, which just takes a little bit of time, like a couple minutes or more, depending on how much you care. Like you were talking a minute ago, Roberto, about how you went to my website and you noticed my personal brand. Like you actually cared to engage with me in those ways. to develop the friendship that you and I already have. But like, when actually telling the story about how you reached out to me is one of the best ways for me to illustrate how important it is to value somebody else and make that value a part of your communication. Because what Roberto did was he made a video that was just for me. And he sent me a message and said, hey, man, I made this video for you. I hope you're having a great day. I really appreciate and value what you do on your podcast, but let me know what you think and let me know how we can talk. So I'm not used to people sending me a personal made video. So I watched the video and it was awesome. And what did he talk about in his video? He talked a little bit about who I am and what I do and how that's connected with him. And then he told me about his book. And I was instantly intrigued by his book because it's something that everybody needs. We all need to know how to get better gigs. But I was willing to pay attention to it more because he engaged with me first and showed that he valued me first. And because of that, the way we're hardwired as human beings, I naturally cared about him. But when we refuse to do that and we just want to, quote unquote, save time because we don't have enough time to make friends with people, all we have enough time for is to send out a bunch of blanket generic crap that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Then you don't get anywhere. So you can spin in circles for forever and blame other people for why they're not listening to you, or you can care about other people and actually make a connection.
Yeah, I was talking to an acquaintance who is, I hope will become a great friend in the future. She's a lovely lady named Laura Price. I met her in San Jose back in the early part of the 2000s. Is that what they call it now? But to my pleasant surprise, although when I look at everything she's done, it should have come as no surprise. She talked a lot about networking and relationships. And she mentioned that, a lot of musicians, maybe most of them, she said, are introverted. They're artists, and, networking and making friends with new people all the time is difficult. But she really went out of her way to do that. And it's funny, I think as a younger person, I was a lot more extroverted. The older I get, it seems the more sort of I could just sit here on my computer all day and practice the drums and, plan for the next podcast and talk to you via Skype. But, whether you're new at it or old, I guess it's old, or you've been doing it for a while, I guess, we have to continue to push ourselves just a little bit, at least at various times in our lives, push ourselves a little bit to make those relationships. I want to jump around for a minute and come back to our discussion. So by the way, I want to mention the full title of the book that I quickly grabbed a hold of, the DIY Musicians Radio Handbook, How to Growth Hack Your Fan Base and Build Stronger Networks Using Indie Radio Airplay. When you first started in radio, and you alluded to this, I just kind of wanted to dig a little deeper if we can, but when you first had the idea to start your own station, I gathered, again, from sort of looking at your professional history that you had radio experience. What was the point at which, A, you decided, I'm going to create the Appetizer Radio Show, and B, did you immediately know that you wanted to create this format for the indie album or the artist's album as opposed to singles?
I first got started in radio when I was in high school. I want to say it was 1997. It might have been 1998. I know I was 16, so maybe it was 97. I used to want to be a comic book artist when I was a little kid and a teenager, but I was not really ever good enough, and I couldn't figure out how to draw anything in motion, so I knew I'd have a limited career field, and I wasn't patient enough to learn. But I enjoyed music. I enjoyed playing drums and guitar. And so I told my parents that I wanted to be on the radio. And my mom talked to this guy at a car dealership one day and found out about this college station in Alvin, Texas. I lived in Sugar Land, which is a suburb of Houston.
I know Sugar Land. I have a brother there.
Really? Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So I called up those folks, and they're like, well, if you're willing to drive down here, it's about a 45-minute drive. If you're willing to drive down here and talk with us, we'll talk to you and we'll see what we can do. Well, and down there, and they're like, well, the fact that you're in high school and that you're showing this kind of initiative, this is really cool. What we can do is set you up to, do a weather and news update once or twice an hour with one of the, college students. And if you get good enough, we'll give you your own show eventually. And so I don't think I was good enough when I got my own show, to be honest with you. I spoke in a very monotone. I had like almost no inflection. You have to have these things when you're dealing with an all audio medium. Mm-hmm. But anyhow, what I had done though is I had built friendships with several of the guys that were there, and they really liked me, and they put in a good word for me with the station managers. And so I moved ahead of the class. I moved ahead of people that were paying to go to school there, because I was in high school. I wasn't paying to go to school there. I was just driving for 45 minutes to go out and do this thing. But I got that experience. And so I got my own show, and I had it, and I would fill in for people. So I was on the radio for like 3 or 4 hours a week, sometimes more if I filled in for somebody. So that was how I got started in radio. And that really opened up a whole lot of doors for me when I went to college. Because usually with most colleges, radio stations, I moved from doing kind of a commercial radio format where we were playing music all the time and, you know, a couple little ad breaks here and there, to public radio where you don't have any advertisements, and it's kind of news, a little bit of music, classical, and some information-driven programming. But since I had radio experience before, and I sent in my demo tape, and on my resume I was able to show that I knew how to do a bunch of stuff that incoming freshmen aren't supposed to know how to do, I got to move to the head of the class again and skip over a couple sophomores and stuff, and I got hired right away. And I stayed at the radio station all the way through college, and it was while I was, I think, in my junior year that the idea came to me to do the Appetizer. And I'd wanted to do a radio show for a long time, but I didn't know what it would be about. And I felt like I needed, I guess kind of almost like in an entrepreneurial sense, I felt like I needed to have some sort of hook. It needed to be something that sounded cool and had a purpose other than just, hey, I got a show, you should listen to it. Because there's tons of people that have that, but there's not really a theme or kind of a compelling enough cause behind it. So I was playing around with a couple of ideas. There's a guy that I think he was in his maybe 30s or 40s at the time that had a show that was kind of a variety music gig. His name is Kyle McAllister. He has a show called Night Sounds, which is on the station that I was on. And so I pitched this idea to him and asked him if he thought it was a good enough idea that would work. And he was like, well, just go ask John, the station manager. So I went and asked John, and it turns out that we had somebody that had basically been doing a show for a couple of years on this time slot, and he hadn't done a new one in like a year and a half, and they were going to, have to get rid of his show, and there was a hole that was going to be there. And so I had really good fortune and really good timing. I don't know if that hole would have been there if I would have had the same opportunity, but sometimes you get lucky by just doing things. And so I, in a sense, got lucky with that time slot being available, and that's how the Appetizer got on the air the first time. And what I started doing was I would play all different types of genres. It was like such a, rainbow sherbet of music selection, and it didn't really have any cohesiveness. And so when I would ask people what they thought about the show, sometimes people liked it, sometimes they didn't, sometimes, they listened really sporadically. I didn't have like the loyal following that I was looking for. And then when I started finding out, this was back in the day when I don't think Facebook existed, or if it did, it was only in some of those Ivy League colleges. Where it was born. Right. But MySpace was kind of the social media. It was, it was the social media. I'm trying to think of it.
Kind of was Facebook in its day.
Yeah.
But it was also for artists. I mean, that was predominantly for artists and musicians, or at least it was a great, great place for them, right?
Yeah, it was, and it kind of did some things that SoundCloud kind of does now in terms of, people being able to connect with each other. Right. So I spent a lot of time on MySpace just kind of going through and finding different music that I liked. And I would ask myself, like, why isn't this on the radio? Why isn't this on the radio? This should be on the radio. So that's really when it was probably around maybe 2005, 2006 when I started incorporating indie music onto the show. And I started to kind of change the theme of it from being, hey, let's play everything that I think should be on the radio, to let's narrow down the genres a little bit. And so my favorite genres have always been alternative rock. Grunge is like my favorite genre other than punk rock. We had a conservative audience, and so I didn't push boundaries at that point. I do now. I don't really care. Because after you've been in the same place for 14 years, I think that you get a little bit more leeway than you do when you're just starting out. But anyhow, sure. So I did a lot of singer-songwriter and folk and alternative rock, and some crossover stuff with like some, jazz blues crossover. But I would find people that I liked, and I just would believe that other people would like them too. And so it was right around, I guess, 2007-ish that I started reaching out and asking people if they'd be interested in letting me interview them. And at the time, I would incorporate interviews into the show. I don't do that anymore. That's what the podcast is for. Mm-hmm. But it was from those interactions that I became friends with some fairly successful, and I don't want to say necessarily big name. I don't know how they would feel about that. But some fairly successful indie DIY artists that are now, world renowned for their music, including like Lindsay Catt and William Fitzsimmons, and people that I consider to be friends of mine. And we've kept up with each other and I've brought them to Abilene, where I live, for concerts and stuff like that. Yeah, so I mean, that's really where the radio stuff got started for me. It wasn't until maybe 2012, 2013. It might have been a little bit after that. I'm a music super fan. When I find an artist that I like, I grab their album and then I listen to it nonstop if it connects with me, because I want to dive into who they are as a person and what their story is and see if their story and my story connect. I think that that's why music is the soundtrack to our lives, you know, and we associate parts of our own story, especially when we go through difficult times, with certain artists and certain songs and certain albums, because sometimes those albums actually get us through those difficult times. Like, honestly, I've been going through a pretty kind of rough patch for the past several months, and there's, you know, with the passing of Chris Cornell, I was listening to his music almost nonstop from the start of 2017 up till now. And his album from 2015, Higher Truth, connects with me because it's so clear that in his songs, he's really still trying to find light and he's still trying to find hope in somewhat hopeless situations. And I can totally identify with that. But then that whole album becomes part of the sound. Now that whole album is a soundtrack to my 2017 experience.
You know, I'm kind of lame in that I joke with my wife. I'll love a song for years before I ever know what they are saying in it. And I get so addicted, though, to the melodies, the sound of the singer's voice, and, you know, other facets like the musicianship and genre. But I get really addicted to the melody. But I share your love of Chris Cornell's music. And as is usual for me, I couldn't tell you what he was talking about on all those songs because I just catch some of the lyrical hooks, but I couldn't sing, you know, or recite lyrics to any of the songs, yet they still mean a lot to me because the melodies move me. Anyway, that's interesting.
Yeah, like a lot of his Soundgarden stuff is very dark. Mm-hmm. Very, very dark. Going back, this week's episode of the Appetizer was entirely dedicated to Chris Cornell. So the only artists that I played that were not Chris Cornell were doing covers of his music.
That's so cool.
And I don't normally do tributes to people. But again, because I sensed he's a guy that struggled with a lot of depression and anxiety and some social awkwardness for a while, and music was his refuge. But even though he felt, I think at times, a little bit socially awkward, like he was one of the most giving and loving people of the whole grunge rock movement. Grunge rock was built around being angry at everybody.
As I remember years ago watching a Beavis and Butthead, and I think they referred to, there may have been a reference to Pearl Jam in one of the episodes, and they referred to the genre as complaint rock, which I thought was great.
Exactly.
Funny.
But I mean, he was a guy that he didn't shy away from interviews. He gave to his fans all the time. From what I've read, he was a very loving, very good person. I'm
so happy to hear that because I sure did. My only comment on Facebook that day was just that, you know, another one of my music heroes, you know, I don't know, I was just really bummed about it. But thank God he left us such a wonderful body of work, but my heart goes out to his family and close friends, especially. So when you were speaking to musicians in those early days, the indie artists that you mentioned, I was waiting for you to say one thing, you said another, but I still want to ask, did you discover in those conversations that a lot of them were struggling, and did a light bulb go off for you then that, wow, I could probably help these people because they don't get, you know, these pieces, relationship building being one of them? Did that ever happen?
Yeah, it happened all the time. And the more it happened, the more it frustrated me, to be honest. Because that was one of the things that I would say very, very early on, like, hey, your frustration with people not paying attention to you is because you're not paying attention to them. Well, but I don't, you know, and then all the excuses would come in. I'm like, hey, man, I've been in your shoes. Like, let's talk about this. So when it became clearer that this is a very pervasive problem, and I also didn't necessarily have the clarity of being able to speak directly to the problem. I was trying to find various different answers that I could give to somebody so that they could run with it. And then it became clear that, like, okay, the real heart and soul of this issue isn't that their music isn't good, or it isn't that they aren't good songwriters, or that they aren't good at quote-unquote marketing. It's that they don't understand what it is that actually is going to make them successful. And everything that I've ever done that has worked and has been successful has come from building friendships and building relationships with people. And I can single out that one quality of myself that I am really, really, really good at. Am I really, really, really good at making radio? I guess so. But I don't necessarily think that that's, you know, my one true superpower. I think that connecting with people having empathy for them and building relationship around mutually beneficial empowerment is my strength. And so when I see people that are trying to just push themselves and push themselves and push themselves, and by that I mean like all they talk about is them, I see a very limited shelf life for that, because I know how, not just how business and how music works, but how life works. And we thrive when we thrive with others. And when we try to focus only on ourselves and make ourselves gods or whatever, one of the best books I've ever read about growth of any kind was written in the 1930s by a guy named Dale Carnegie. Probably heard of him. Most people that have done anything in business are familiar with Dale Carnegie, but as a musician, if you've never heard that name, Mr. Carnegie wrote this incredible book called How to Win Friends and Influence People. In that book, I quote it several times at different places in my book because it's so powerful. But one of the things that Dale said was, you can win more friends in 2 months by showing an interest in other people than you can in 2 years trying to get other people interested in you. And that was certainly true for when I was trying to market myself and all I did was talk about me. And I was reaching out to people that I already knew.
Was this as a radio personality, or?
When I was trying to market this show for syndication, I reached out to my existing contact base. These are people that know me. They know my name. They know my face. We've had dialogue before, but I'm sending them the same blanket generic email that I'm sending everybody. I'm basically BCCing a whole bunch of people the same crap. And not only did I not get like people saying yes, I didn't get responses at all. And I realized that it's because nobody likes reading a blanket spam message. Even if it comes from somebody that you know, actually that can kind of turn their stomach from wanting to talk to you. If you reach out and make a direct connection, and you talk about like a mutually beneficial conversation that could be had about this subject, you get a different response because you started with appealing to the person's interest that you were trying to reach. And so when I realized that was something that was not done very much or very much at all, even from people that are supposedly experts, and I'm talking about the so-called music promotion, music marketing, PR companies, it became very clear what my calling was.
That's great. Something that's somewhat near and dear to me, I don't know if something can be somewhat near and dear to oneself, but you sort of got on the edge of this, but I'm curious to know if you have run across it or continue to run across it and just what your thoughts are. And it happens in any world, I know, I realize, but I'm having to listen to some podcast episodes that I recorded that are essentially a podcast audio version of my book. And there was a bit in there about, some musicians operating, just people in general operating from a place of scarcity, and the topic at that particular point of the book was really about sharing information with one another about, venues and opportunities and, details about these certain kinds of gigs, and having run into, or at least heard about a lot of, or some people who are kind of afraid to do that because they don't feel like there's enough, in my mind, they don't feel like there's enough gigs in town to be giving away what they worked so hard to get. Have you found this something that you work on with artists or you see much of, and what are your thoughts on that whole operating from a place of scarcity versus, look, there's plenty of work for everyone, or there's plenty of gigs for everyone, or whatever, whatever you want, and there's plenty of it for everyone if we just put ourselves in the right mindset.
Yeah, man, I think the mindset's a big deal. Actually, the mindset is a big deal, and what we think about ourselves and what we think about others determines a whole lot about our future, and it determines a whole lot about our present. This is interesting. It's a conversation I had with an artist couple last night that do graphic art, and their work to try to break our local community out of this mindset that I've got to hold on to what's mine because if we share, then I will lose something. You described it as scarcity. I think that's a good description for it. The reality of the situation is, if we focus on whatever we focus on grows. If you focus your attention on there never being enough opportunities for you, then you're never going to get work. If you focus your energy and your mindset and your attention on you having more opportunities than you know what to do with, it might take a little while, but those opportunities are going to come into being, and they will present themselves to you in ways that you can't expect. So for the artist that, in a sense, to me, that's operating out of insecurity and feeling like there's not going to be enough and that you have to hold on to what's yours or you have to fight for crumbs. That's a mentality that is really based in a lot of insecurity and fear. And fear hasn't produced a whole lot of good results for anybody. Actually, fear's produced very limited results for most people. So for the people that choose to still operate in fear instead of working diligently to overcome that personally, and then find ways to take that thing that you're afraid of and transform it into something that empowers you, that's a different story. So my attitude and my thoughts towards people that come at, whether it's gigging or whether it's marketing their music or getting radio airplay or getting featured on a Spotify playlist or getting a blog review or whatever, if it's about, even if it's about like you found a way to make that happen, so you've got to hold on to that way. You've got to protect it like the secret, because if other people knew about the secret, then they'd be doing it too, and you wouldn't have access to the same opportunities, and all that's rubbish. I know it's rubbish because I wrote a book trying to help everybody have opportunities to do the same thing. And the only thing that will do, hopefully, is get better music on the radio and build better relationships with other people. But this whole idea, and I'm sorry if I'm belaboring the point, but this whole idea that if you've got something that works, you've got to hold on to it and protect it and, defend it like the Holy Grail, I think is a pretty surefire way to not have the life that you want.
Yeah, and I haven't thought about it much in terms of insecurity, but that's a good point. One of my mentors, my main man, he's always reminding his people that, somebody is definitely going to like you best, whatever it is that you do. So there's really no point in being concerned about things like competition or, not enough of whatever opportunity it is you're seeking, because to be able to, for instance, work with artists like you do, you've certainly met others who do the same. Perhaps you collaborate with them on a regular basis or do some sort of inner work in a group setting like a mastermind with some of them. But I think it's so true that it's never been easier for us to market ourselves with the advent of everything that the internet has brought us. And there's a lot of people out there doing what we all do, but it's so true. I mean, we do have to be ourselves, right? And let our personality shine so that we can attract the people that will like us best. Does that hit on some of the same things that you talk to your clients about?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the term self-love kind of gets a bad rap sometimes when we don't understand what it means. For me, it's a matter of valuing who you are and celebrating that. I think about things in different terms. I'm a comic book nerd and a superhero movie nerd. So I think about things in terms of superpowers. And a little side story, when I was a little kid, I wanted to be Superman because I wanted to be invincible. Now, all of the other attributes were appealing, obviously, flight and super speed and strength and all that fun stuff. But I've always been a very small-framed person. That was always the shortest, skinniest, scrawniest little dude. Growing up, it's led to a lot of bullying and a lot of insecurities. And so my thought was, well, I wouldn't have to deal with these insecurities if nothing could touch me. And so I spent a lot of time wishing that I was not, I don't want to say frail, but that I was not this weaker, smaller person, instead of embracing the fact that I've got a really big heart and I really, really love people. And that really big heart comes out even stronger because there's this small dude that's, exploding with love. And when I realized that, I realized what my real superpowers are, is that I see other people's stories and I care about them and I can see into what it is that they're struggling with in ways that other people can't. And so in that way, I'm more like Professor X. So I say all of that to say that when you know what your superpower is, it empowers you to be yourself and to be more fully you, and to not have the same weight of the insecurities and all the things that you think that you're not. Because when you focus on the things that you're not, then that leads to feeling like you're less than. But instead, knowing the attributes about you that make you uniquely you, just like you said, makes for a different way of going about thinking about yourself and thinking about others, because then you start thinking about, okay, well, how can I take the things that are uniquely me and connect with other people so that we have a better, community or better experiences or better anything. And then that gets right back into the, relationship building stuff for success.
What are your favorite comic books today, by the way?
Honestly, I don't read as much as I used to. Following the individual storylines, I worked at a comic shop when I graduated from college, just part-time
Nice.
for a while. And met a lot of really cool people, but I learned then, that was a long time ago, it was 2005. I learned then that this is a very expensive hobby because every week there's a new title. And, $3 or $4 every week, or depending on when the stuff comes out. Yeah, that's
you decided.
And that's this one book. So what I do, man, is I either grab the trade paperback, which is the accumulation of a series of books into one volume, or I read graphic novels.
Yeah.
I'm a massive Batman fan. I haven't read a lot of the new 52 stuff, which is DC's reboot of all their characters, and I don't agree with any of the way that they've done most of that stuff. But that's a different story. I watch more superhero films, I think, than I read superhero comics, but that's what it is.
Cool. I have a good friend in San Jose who's an artist, and we found out we had a mutual acquaintance in a comic book shop that's pretty cool in San Jose. It actually has a music venue within it, like a sound room, which is so nice. Anyway, yeah, interesting world. When I was very, very young, I probably gave away some very would-be expensive comic books because I didn't know they were going to be worth money. But it's not something I grew up into, but I find it to be a fascinating world. So, and I too like Batman. So see, we have another thing in common.
Yes, it's my friend.
Yeah, I see that you do some volunteering and have or currently serve on a board in your area, and it occurred to me to ask you a little bit about that, and if it's anything that you touch on or get asked about by some of your clients or musicians that inquire about what you're doing, or asking you questions about indie radio and trying to figure out what the right way to get their music on radio is. But does it ever come up? And what are you currently involved in today?
Well, when I worked for the radio station, and I was there for 13 years total, I eventually worked my way up to where I was the operations manager, hiring people and doing every job that there was to do.
By the way, I was going to say earlier that this might be a little grand, but I was like, you're kind of like the Derek Sivers of radio career. Derek Sivers being the founder of CD Baby, and there's a story of when he was preparing to go to Berkeley, the music college, that he just happened to be acquainted with a guy who was a very knowledgeable music theory person who told Derek that 4 years was the path of chumps, and he wanted to see if maybe he could help him get through faster, so he helped Derek get through it in 2 years. But when you were talking about the relationships that you had and how you were jumping over your class, it reminded me of Derek Sivers at Berkeley College of Music, School of Music. Anyway, you were saying.
He did that through genius, and I just did that by making friends with people.
He did a little of the same, but certainly he's a little genius.
Yeah, so the public radio is nonprofit. It's a nonprofit organization. It makes its money by individual contributions from members of an individual community in the surrounding area. It also makes money from doing a form of marketing, advertising, but not doing the same kind of stuff that commercial radio does. Commercial will say the name of a company about 8 times. They will mention the call to action like 20 times, and they will give the same phone number about 90 times, all within about 35 seconds. I stretched that just a little bit, but
I know what you mean.
Yeah, good. Public radio, you can say the name of the organization twice. You can give 0 calls to action. It's really a kind of an information sort of thing, but what you're telling the community is these businesses support what we do, so we want you to support what they do. You don't say it in those terminology, but that's the message that gets across. So between those two things and some grants and stuff, like that's the way that public radio pays for itself. And I'm going to say growing up in radio within that culture, because I still did grow up a whole lot while I was there. Having all those experiences, we would do fundraisers twice a year where we'd invite members of the community to come on the radio and talk with us about why they listened to the station and why they contributed and all that stuff. And I saw in those fundraising endeavors that this is the life of an artist. Whether you're a graphic artist or a music artist, or you write plays or you write books or whatever it is, like your best bet for gaining the momentum and the long-term stability and support that you need is to build relationships with people within your community, and to know how to not only provide something of value to them, but also know how to ask them for that support. And so from those experiences, it's easier now for me to talk to artists about the steps to take to transform their art into something that not only benefits other people, but it is sustainable and supportive enough for them to be able to live off of. And so you asked about boards. This year I served on 2 boards, I think, maybe 3. One that doesn't, The past 2 years I've served on 3 different nonprofit organization boards in some form or fashion. And right now I'm only doing one. I had to kind of minimalize some things for time management. Mm-hmm. But I pick organizations in my community based on relationships that I have. And with certain people's friends, or with my certain friendship circles, I care about the people that I'm in relationship with. And so I want to be a part of what they're doing. And what nonprofit boards, those volunteer opportunities, it shows you even more how well organizations run. And you can see very clearly what good leadership is and what good communication is. And, the organizations that I've worked with, that their people have good relationships with each other and good relationships with the community, those organizations thrive. I've been a part of some nonprofit boards where those relationships are broken and frayed and damaged, and nobody's doing anything to change that, and they struggle and they struggle and they struggle. And so it becomes very clear to me how to use examples of those experiences in my coaching and in my teaching and in my speaking and anything that I do, because all of it's relevant and all of it's true. And, the reference points of, well, if it doesn't work for an organization, it's probably also going to be difficult for an individual to try to go through things and just, steamroll people and think that that's going to get them ahead. If it works for an organization to be a team builder and a collaborator and a community builder, then it's probably going to work for an individual too. You're just going to use some different tactics to make that happen. So in terms of experience with nonprofits and boards and stuff like that, it comes up in some of the coaching stuff. But honestly, I don't think that as many artists are aware of the benefit that nonprofits are, or the benefit for them that volunteering with a nonprofit is. You want to get in front of a ton of people that care about the arts and are financially supporting the arts. Go volunteer at a nonprofit organization. Those people, those financial backers are all over the place, and they're incredibly giving, incredibly loving, incredibly nurturing people. So the people that you want to get in front of are right in your community. You just need to take the time to go build a relationship with them by giving just a little bit of your time.
Yeah, I've inadvertently found this to be true from volunteering with organizations in Silicon Valley in the recent past. And I was just curious. I had never thought of it, and I just noticed before our call, I was like, I should ask a little bit about this. And I'm glad to hear that it is a topic of conversation. Like I said, I'd never really thought about it other than, I suppose I had. I actually mentioned one volunteer gig, but it was more in the context of just relationship building. But I guess that's what we're talking about here. A little side story in the book about meeting a musician and talking about a trio project, which consequently never got off the ground for the original people that were having the conversation. I still created a trio project, but I met some really great people in that one conversation. And then, not to mention the organization itself, a lot of lovely people. I actually had one of my most memorable performance experiences because I was invited to perform for one of their events, and they happened to have a lot of creative production people there, so they just made this beautiful event that I got to perform at with some of my bandmates. And anyway, seems like it makes a lot of sense. I'm glad to hear that it is a topic of conversation. We're getting close to the hour. The other thing I noticed about you, and I'm curious because, I noticed you have a marketing background, and we've kind of touched on that, but your professional career has had you working on very marketing specific projects. Obviously, everything that you've done in radio touches on marketing, and what you talk about with your clients is in large part about marketing. And when I first started the Unstarving Musician project, or had this idea for it, one of the first little tagline words that I had in mind was marketing, because I wanted, among other things, to help musicians be better marketers and business people and all those other things that help them, make more music. How much focus do you put on marketing discussion with your clients, or just in your relationship building, and or how important do you see it for artists that are looking to do things like be on public radio or indie radio, or to tour or record or whatever it is that they're doing?
Marketing is relationship building, so it's the same thing. When you think about marketing as just getting the word out, I think that's missing the mark. If we're playing darts, just getting the word out is that outer white rim of the target that you're sticking the pin in just to put it on the wall.
Yeah.
It's not technically, maybe it counts as something, but it's not really serving the purpose for you that relationship building is. And you have to remember that relationship building, you're always building relationships with somebody doing something, no matter what you do. So that relationship could be something that leads to a conversation with somebody, or it could just be a relationship where they know of who you are. They know of your name. They've heard a song, or they know that you're a band. That's the relationship that they have with you, some sort of knowledge that you exist. The relationship could be that they've seen something that you've done. They've seen your CD cover, or they've seen the logo of your band, or they've seen a video that you've done, and that one experience is the relationship that they have. Or it could be something that's closer, where they know everything about you. They follow all of your stuff. If you're a band that tours regionally, they hit all of those shows, and they're constantly talking about you, and the relationship that they have with you is very passionate. The marketing that you do that reaches out to them, reaches out to other people, it's all about building a relationship. And you're just going to have different degrees of what that relationship looks like. So the ways to think about how to market more effectively is to think about the different types of audience that you have. You've got people that are what I would call your super fans. They're super passionate about you and die hard into your stuff. They come to your shows regularly. They try to engage with you as much as they can. Maybe they comment more often on your social media channels, or they own if you've got merchandise, t-shirts and stickers and all that stuff, like they own all that. These are the super connected people. Then you've got, your main fan base that are people that are engaging in different forms and fashion. They buy your music when you offer it to them. They might not be the first people to jump in the boat when you offer it for sale, but they do own it. They buy your merch periodically, and they come to your shows. And you've got people that are on the fringe. They kind of are in and out. They know enough about you that they know who you are, and they like you, but they haven't jumped in yet. And then you've got the outside realm of music fans as a whole that might or might not know who you are. And thinking about things from the perspective of these different breakdowns of audience type and fan base type, and what different types of relationship you have with different people in your circles, even just on a human-to-human basis, kind of gives you a little bit of an insight into the way that you put messages together to appeal to those different people. And not just appeal to them, but connect with them and get them to respond in the ways that you want them to respond. And so marketing is that relationship, because you are giving somebody some messaging and some content, and you want them to respond to you in certain ways. And so the way that you put together those messages determines the response that you get. And like we said a minute ago, the intention that you have behind what it is that you're doing also leads to a lot of the growth and or success that you have from these endeavors.
That's great. And it serves as just a good reminder for me, too, that marketing is relationship building. That's good stuff. Well, you have a ton of great resources for growth farming, as you call it, the bigger picture and relationship building on your website. Please tell my listeners where they can find you, and anything else that you want to tell them in our parting minute here.
Yeah, I've got a podcast that I'm still working on. Had a conversation with Roberto. I'm going to publish our episode, Roberto, probably in about a couple weeks. But my podcast is the DIY Artist Route, and I connect with not only musicians, but people that work in the music industry in a variety of capacities, and also people that work outside of music, but are building strong communities and having massive influence. One of those people is where I got the growth farmer term from. I had the fortune and blessing to get to speak with one of my absolute giant heroes, Seth Godin, who's a massive best-selling author and platform builder for marketing and business.
Yeah, wow.
In our conversation, I asked him a question. We were kind of playing on this metaphor that he's like Moses in the desert for creative entrepreneurs. And in the things that we're trying to do, all of us are trying to build something. And there's so many options out there for what to do, and so many how-to things, and so many experts, and so many this and that. But I read his blog every day, or not his blog. Yeah, I read his email every day that's his blog, and they're short and sweet, little condensed nuggets of wisdom. I feel like every day when I read his blog in my email inbox, I can take one step closer to the promised land. And so when I reached out to him, I told him that metaphor, and that's kind of how I was able to get him on my podcast. But my last question to him was, what's one piece of advice you would give to a musician that they can take one step towards their promised land? And he said this: It's the idea that the grass is always greener on the other side that gets us in trouble. What we have to realize is we already have enough green grass right in front of us. What we need to do is farm it and not go hunting.
That's great.
Oh, man, brilliant. So I sat on that answer for 2 or 3 weeks, and there's some people in my life that do a lot of gardening, and I've got a garden in my backyard, and I've been trying to figure out how to tie in the process of planting seeds and cultivating seeds and watering and pruning and, weeding and all that stuff, incorporate that into the work that I do, because I could see all these correlations. And then that phrase, farm it and not go hunting, that Seth Godin said to me, that made it all make sense. So growth farming is just that. It's relationship building, and relationship building takes time, and it takes cultivation, it takes nurturing. And if you keep sowing into other people instead of trying to chase a one-time fix, like getting the one song played on the air or getting the one blog review, if instead you'll cultivate a relationship, that will produce fruit for you over time, that will produce more fruit for you over time and lead to other wins. And so all of that stuff and all these insights into relationship building is at my website, dgrantsmith.com. I've got growth farming tips as a link there. I've got links to the podcast and other ways that you can get some material that will show you how to build really awesome relationships. And on that subject, I do have my book available for sale there, but I want to give away a free Kindle version or PDF, if that's easier for you, to 3 people that listen to your podcast. All you have to do is go to my website and sign up for my e-newsletter, and also send me some sort of message. You can do it on social media, or you can send me an email. All my information is on my website. But just send me a message that says that you heard this podcast and you want to connect, and I will choose 3 people at random, and I will send you a free copy of the ebook.
Well, that's very kind of you, and an awesome parting story and incredible parting words on the green grass around us. So thank you again for making time to be on the show. We clearly ran out of time because your podcast was on my conversation list and it didn't come up until you mentioned it just now. But thank you again. You're a great guy, and I know we're going to get to talk more in the future.
Well, thank you so much, Roberto, for everything that you do, man. You're a very good example of how to be successful by being very intentional about connecting with people. So thank you for this opportunity.
You got it, buddy. We'll talk soon. Hey, this is Robonzo. Thanks so much for listening. Did you know I'm also an author? Check out my book, The Unstarving Musician's Guide to Getting Paid Gigs. How to Get Booked and Paid What You're Worth Over and Over Again, available on Amazon. And the book is also available in audio format as The Unstarving Musician's Guide podcast. Check it out wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Last but not least, are you a gigging musician, recording artist, songwriter, or touring professional? Perhaps struggling to get your music out to the world? Struggling to get the gigs you want? Pop over to unstarvingmusician.com and sign up for my email list. I'll send you an occasional email with tips, expert advice, music, musician resources, and anything else I come across that might make your journey better and brighter. With much gratitude, peace, love, and more cowbell.